Hope you're well whenever you catch this and whenever you tune in. My name is Heather, and we're going to continue this series on exploring astrology from another lens, something I'm calling spiral astromancy, where we take out the assumption of things having to be so linear, things having to be so prescripted in our reality, and we start seeing where we can infuse more spiral consciousness, a little bit more chaos, a little bit more unpredictability, a little bit more dark matter material. And this basically helps us to craft the life that we want. So, one thing that we do in this path of spiral astromancy is we have the audacity to say that we can author our own destiny. And in order to do that, we look at the structures of things. And so that's why we pick apart the astrology templates that we've been given, because if you look at them closely, you can see some accuracy in them, but it's because you're tapped into a very predictable algorithm. That's why sometimes astrology feels so spot on. But when you get out of the linear predictable program and you learn more about the science and the how and the why behind a lot of these predictive programs, you can actually work with this energy and get to the source material of reality creation. Okay. So to get us in the vibe, I have some stuff I'm going to be utilizing. If any of this is of interest to you, I can go in a lot more depth with you through a Beyond the Birth Chart reading, which I'm offering on Ko-Fi. Outside of that, I do offer one-on-one experiences. It's not coaching, so I don't coach anymore. The only offering I have now to work one-on-one with folks is through a process of uncoaching and basically dismantling a lot of hierarchical thinking, a lot of hierarchical concepts, or organizing the world, which might be getting you out of alignment with really achieving whatever it is that you're seeking to achieve, because you are the key, you are the answer. And a lot of times there's just so many loopholes, there's so much trickery within the simulation, which can keep us spinning and looping. And so if we start seeing this more as a structural plan, and we look at your life from as more of like a structural plan, what are the kinks that are not working out for you, and we look at this a little bit more architecturally, then we can accomplish a lot more than we can through traditional coaching programs, which tout a lot about like the law of attraction and all that kind of stuff, which those laws can work, but they work within a very predefined notion of the simulation. Okay, so if that's something of interest to you, getting at more about the roots and the structures of the simulation, if you've had a really big issue that you're ready to overcome, because that's another thing is when I do work with people, like I go in really deep with you, but I'm also not like a miracle worker or like some like shaman person that's like gonna change your life. Like you're that answer already. I'm path working a journey with you so that you get on your own trajectory, but I'm not here to be somebody's miracle worker too. I have to say that because sometimes people expect pretty interesting things, when we go on journeys together. And I grow each time through a lot of these experiences. So I'm very grateful, but I had to transcend the avatar of coach. Okay, so today we talk about the first house. This is the house of the avatar. This is the house of the archetype. It's also the least obvious house. You would think that your first house is just super in your face, right? Because it's what's written on your face a lot of times. It's how you appear within the matrix simulation. However, if we think about reality creation from the standpoint of a game, right? When you're in a game, do you see yourself a lot? Not really, right? Like you pick if you're lucky, you're able to pick the person that you're going to play, your avatar, right? What they wear, the sorts of tools they have, that you have like a backstory for them, all that kind of stuff is laid out, right? but you don't see yourself when you're playing a game. And once again, if y'all have been following this particular series that I'm doing, you'll hear me make a lot of game analogies, but actually don't play video games and stuff. But this whole game analogy has been really helpful in studying the architecture of games, the way games are engineered, the way experiences or worlds are built through games, and also through writing and scripting is really, really helpful for navigating the simulation. Okay, but when you think about it, even though the first house is supposed to be the most obvious house, it's the one that you're the least likely to see. It's so obvious because it's like the skin that you're in, that you don't really know how you're being projected in the simulation. But as you start kind of uncovering different dynamics of the false matrix, you want to study your avatar. And this is not something that's easy to do. It does take a lot of reflection or just time to sit with yourself. And why, a lot of times we want to kind of take the victim role, right? And that's important. Some of us are wearing the archetype of victim. If you've been somebody who's been like kind of more of like the intergenerational curse breaker, or you've been like more of that black sheep kind of energy, or why do they all hate me, or it's always like me going up against and fighting the masses. These are all scripts. These are all avatars that we may not have chosen. It may have just been coded for us to wear that particular skin within the simulation. It's not necessarily because we wanted to, it's because that's been what has been scripted for us, okay? This is the avatar, and as obvious as it is to everyone else, it's not very obvious to us. And so I'm gonna call in some different resources into this chat. So the first thing I wanna call in is I'm reading this book. I'm reading this book. It's called Towards a New Architecture. So I'm literally studying architecture right now, and in engineering, but more so a lot around architecture. I just recently released a book called The Architect Is Her, and it is about this concept of, instead of being so put down by the simulation, fighting the simulation, fighting the false matrix, that is really tiring and exhausting and is a part of its own program. What makes more sense, what I'm kind of coming, because I've gone through a lot of different phases, and for folks who have kind of been with me on this journey, y'all have seen me go through different phases, and I'm really transparent about it because I think that on this journey, you're supposed to change, you're supposed to transform, you're supposed to try on new avatars, and that could look really weird in the simulation, right? Because especially with social media, you have your one social media handle, right? And then you have your audience that you're curating. You spend all this time on social media curating a particular audience, a particular aesthetic, a particular vibe. And what does social media want you to do a lot of times? If you have another interest, if you are multi-passionate, you're expected to create a whole new energy through another Instagram handle or hashtag or social media hashtag. It's supposed to be a whole other energy because it's an aesthetic, okay? And so this is a really prevalent example of how we're boxed in to these different shells, to these different avatars. And if we color outside the lines too much with our avatar, then it poses a threat to the structure of the simulation. Okay. And so I find that it's a lot of times the things that are the most fun, or the most, I guess I would say, the most taken for granted in the simulation, those are the keys out. So play, right? Who has time to play, right? When you're being inundated with the news and crisis after crisis and collapse after collapse and all the things, right? Who has time to play or be playful? And it's almost kind of weird if you have too much time to play or to think creatively. That's considered a luxury. Okay, so anything that's considered luxurious or only for a certain population, you want to pay attention around the why of that, okay? What is the symbolism behind that? So play seems like a luxury because you need to work, you need to grind it out, you need to be productive, you have all these things to be serious about, right? So play is something that you want to look at. That's a structural thing around why certain people feel like they can't afford to play, they can't afford to be creative. Art is another one. You'll notice that the arts, a lot of times, like in public school systems, a lot of times those are under attack. The funding is under attack. There's always less funding for the arts, right? Even though it's so prevalent, it's such a prevalent building block within the simulation. That's because there's a lot of power there. Once again, only certain people are allowed to be artistic. Only certain people are allowed to have time to be creative, okay? And so you want to look at the structure of that. And so in this book, Towards a New Architecture, I'm just going to... it's basically, it was written quite a while ago, and it's an architect basically writing to other architects and talking about how the structures of things will need to shift. But a lot of times there's contention or there's resistance to shifting structures, not because we need those structures, but because we get so caught up in our repetition of things, okay? And so this author is talking about the plan and how the plan generates the architecture, okay? So let's just kind of take this architect's words in, and let's just think about this within the false matrix simulation. So this book, it says, the plan is the generator. Without a plan, you have lack of order and willfulness. The plan holds itself the essence of sensation. The great problems of tomorrow, dictated by collective necessities, puts the question of plan in new form. Modern life demands and is waiting for a new kind of plan, both for the house and the city, okay? So as we start getting into the architecture of the simulation, we want to get out of the actual stories and we want to look at the materials which make up the stories, okay? So this plan, which generates the simulation, you want to start thinking about, like, try to come up with it a little bit more literally. Like, what does the plan look like? What would a plan within the simulation look like, and what would be the goal of that plan, okay? And when you start looking at things a little deeper in this way, you can start doing a lot more critical thinking. Another thing that a lot of times is, quote, under attack, right? Like in schools and stuff like that, is like critical thinking. This idea of really just asking yourself questions. Why are things the way that they are, you know? This helps you to get out of the factory settings model that a lot of times the first house will put you in. You know, as I started doing a lot of this work around archetypes and avatars, and I've been doing it for a while, but my perception of it has shifted quite dramatically. I had to have a hard conversation with the sort of architecture that I was wearing in this simulation, and I had to take accountability for why certain experiences were being called into my reality. Does this mean that it's my fault or that I'm going to play the victim? No, but you know, if we look at this from an architectural standpoint, what architecture am I wearing in the simulation or in my field, right? That might be calling different experiences. So this isn't to say, oh, I deserve certain things happening or coming into my reality, but there might literally be attractors or magnets or reflectors, different architectural things within my field, which might be calling a certain trajectory, okay? And, you know, to be serious about creating your own reality, being the own architect of your reality, you need materials to do that, okay? We need to think about this stuff literally. So you would want to create your own blueprint, but you would also want to know, are you running under a certain blueprint currently? And if so, what are those instruction sets? What do they look like, okay? And, you know, I've mentioned this before, but this means getting at some of the common assumptions around what humanity is and what the nature of reality is, and kind of going beneath the surface of religion or race or culture, like going a lot deeper than that and starting to see these different things as blueprints, okay? And they might not necessarily be divine design, it might be something else. So the next thing, I brought in this conversation around the plan. What is the plan? A lot of times we think that we are making decisions, like the certain coffee shop that we go to. I don't know if y'all have played around with this, but have you noticed sometimes that there's like a weird magnetic pull for you to go to certain places? You're not quite sure why, it just feels like you need to go there, Is that like really your free will, or is that because there's a certain loop that you're on and you're supposed to visit this particular place, or you're supposed to get this kind of coffee, or this person's supposed to come into your reality? So if you are like going to have the audacity to be the creator of your reality, you would also want to have the audacity to create your own blueprint. Okay. So next I'm going to, paper and pencil. So this is like, this definitely has a little bit of carbon in it. So I wanted to write with something that has carbon in it, because carbon is everywhere. Carbon is in a lot of different building materials, as it relates to just biologically, like in our bodies, there's a lot of carbon. Then there's also this interesting thing that we hear a lot about called our carbon footprint. As we're talking about being more sustainable or not being as wasteful, there's always this talk around your carbon footprint, like how much of a carbon footprint that you have. And the more of a carbon footprint that you have, the more stuff you've generated, the more you've amassed, the more of a dent that you've made on the planet, right? And so the idea with a lot of folks with like this whole thing around ecologically friendly is to reduce your carbon emissions and to reduce your carbon footprint. Carbon is also found in money, like the way money is printed. You're going to find carbon in that. You're going to find carbon in blueprints. Okay, so you want to start also just getting really literal, like as you're navigating the simulation. Start looking at like really literal things that are in your reality and start questioning the nature of why. Okay, so I could take this paper and I can create a blueprint, right? Like I could start with creating a story, and whatever I put my energy into, I am giving life to this. Okay, so let's say that I have a story of she was born in Madrid. Okay. So that's the start of my story, and this could go so many different ways. She was born in Madrid. Okay, I use carbon to write on this. It's a building block. Okay, so even just there's something else that happens when I write with carbon than if I were to write with something else. Just because we're looking at things from like the atoms of things, the building blocks of things. Okay, so you also just want to start thinking about why are things printed on what they're printed on. So like a lot of old school blueprints, they utilized linen and cotton to print on them with carbon. And they do the same thing with finance, like with money, right? So linen and cotton is used to be printed on with money, and then carbon is utilized in the ink. Is that just a coincidence, or is there something like a building block that's happening with that? So like that's kind of how you want to start looking at things, right? As like some weird Rubik's Cube sort of thing. But you don't want to take it too seriously, because then you get into like a weird conspiracy theory sort of energy, and there's all these theys out to get you. And, you could go down that route. You go down the whole targeted individual route. It's not fun, and there's only so far you can go and so much joy you can have going down that. But if you start looking at things of like, I can literally create, and I can utilize the building blocks around me to create. And if I'm not able to create, let's get into why. are there certain instruction sets that are running in my field or in my reality, which says that I'm not allowed to create? Okay, so that's something that I've definitely moved through a lot. I used to be somebody who didn't see myself as being really creative. You know, I didn't see myself as being artistic. I didn't think that I had the time or the luxury to be artistic. Okay. And that's one thing that you'll start noticing is how tied up art is. I mean, art is architecture. Art is a form of architecture. Art is taking raw materials and shaping it into something. Okay. So I just wrote one sentence. She was born in Madrid, but I can go so many different ways. This could turn into a novel. This could turn into a short story, a song, a poem, right? I can create whatever I want from this. But then we also want to not just think about the fact that I knew how to write words, okay, but what materials did I use to write this, okay? And as you're shaping and sculpting your reality within the simulation in a way that is out of alignment with your NPC, your avatar, your archetype, the things that you were scripted, your factory settings, okay? If you want to get out of the factory setting kind of energy, then you want to really start thinking about these things, okay? Because you might be trying to fit like a circle into a square peg kind of thing, right? So you want to know, is the engineering for this correct? Like, anything is possible, but am I utilizing the tools that I actually need in order to get to where I want to go? And those tools aren't always going to just be the law of attraction, right? Those tools might be a little bit more intricate. Like, you might literally, your fate script, what's fated for you, is not to be artistic, you know, is to maybe be a little bit more of the helper, the codependent one, the one that makes other people's dreams comes true, or speaks life into other people. But maybe you're not super meant to, according to the simulation, according to your avatar, maybe that's not meant for you. But we're operating under the assumption or the knowledge that we're creator beings. So if we set the intention to create, and if that's a desire that we have, then it should be that way, okay? And so navigating the simulation, getting out of all of the rigmarole and the minutia of the simulation, really, we want to start looking at how does bureaucracy happen, you know? Bureaucracy is you set an intention to do something and you know, 10 years later, you're still not doing that thing. Why? Is it because you're not capable? Sometimes it's because that's not the life path that you are supposed to go through. There's been a lot of blockages I've had to get through in my creative process to even create, to finish things, to finish whether they are musical pieces or books or whatever it is, or creating different frameworks. Like, there are blocks that I get to where I'm not supposed to ever find that out, or I'm never supposed to bring this in. Like, I have to go through these moments of I can't do this, or I'm not supposed to do this. But instead of staying in that karmic loop, I notice that it's a loop, and I'm like, well, no, my potential is infinite. So if I feel like I can't do this, there's a glitch in there's something wrong with the foundation or the plan that I'm following that I got to get out of, okay? Because that's kind of how we loop. We get stuck in like these weird survival consciousness, you know, this idea that there's not enough time and there's not enough money and all this sort of stuff keeps us in scarcity, and it keeps us from picking up the materials that we can utilize to create our reality. And a lot of times that's because we're operating within an avatar or an archetype that we may not even fully know that we're operating within, but it locks us in. It keeps us shelled, okay? It keeps us in the factory, and it keeps us from not being able to really tap into our full potentiality. And we can do a lot of cool stuff. There's a lot that we can do once we put our minds to it. It's just getting through the programs and the belief systems that says that we're not worthy, that we don't deserve it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about avatars and archetypes. And I'm going to share a little bit around what I've kind of navigated through it, and some of it. You do need to have an awareness of who you are. Okay, so let's talk about the first house. The first house is how you appear. So if you have a lot of planets in your first house, you can get a little confused. It could feel like you're literally wearing a whole bunch of different masks, and you're one person to one group of people, and then you're another person to another group of people, and you feel like you have to constantly switch it up or switch masks. And I have noticed, and I'm not a doctor or a medical professional, but sometimes when you have a lot of first house placements, then you can get into like certain diagnoses of borderline, all that kind of stuff. Okay. And a lot of times it's because you may have been assigned a lot more masks or avatars to wear within the simulation for whatever reason. Okay. And this is where, if you have let's say you have like a Neptune in the first house. So Neptune is the planet of dreams and arts and theater and that sort of thing. A Neptune in the first house person would be a natural actor or a natural theater person, because literally they're bringing the dream state. Neptune rules the dream state, but they're bringing it into their first house. So it's almost like your identity becomes pliable like water, like you can mold or sculpt it. It's not just one fixed thing. As I was coming up with the information for this, one thing that came to my mind, you all know those actors that do they commit to their role really well, like they get a role of a lifetime, where they have to make themselves look really different. They might have to put on a whole bunch of weight or lose a whole bunch of weight, or maybe they're traditionally seen as being more attractive within the simulation, but they make themselves look quote unquote unattractive within the simulation. That would be an actor who knows how to play with the limits of their avatar shell or their archetype. In order to be a great actor and all that sort of stuff, you need to be able to be malleable. You can't be so fixed in your shell. Okay. This is why arts and theater people, they're the ones in the simulation that sometimes can get away with a lot more. If you notice, artistic people, they're allowed to be a little bit more eccentric, for example, right? Because they're an artist, and then there's this whole thing around being a tortured artist and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of, that being said, there's a lot of oppression that the arts can face. So even if you think about Hollywood and just kind of how sometimes artists in Hollywood, they have to join cults or, weird stuff, all that weird stuff that happens with, there's a lot of gatekeeping in art. Okay. It's a free way to express yourself. It's, if you tap into your artistry, you're tapping into an endless well of infinity, right? So that being said, with the way that the plan of the simulation is, there would be a lot of rules on that, right? So there's a lot of rules. This is why we have these weird things with museums too, how museums, they keep artifacts and all that sort of stuff. And there's this weird gatekeeping thing that happens with art, whereas you're the art, or you get to see the art, you can be the patron, and then the artist gets to create, so there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens in the arts to basically prove who is worthy of creating, who's worthy of bringing creations into the world, and who is not. And so as you get out of the false programs of the simulation, your art is a must. It is non-negotiable. Your artistry, your creativity is absolutely non-negotiable. And if you think it's not, then there's more excavating to be done. There's more rigidity to be dissolved within your reality, okay? Because you want to start seeing your life as clay. Clay can be sculpted, clay can be molded. But, you know, if you have ever taken a pottery class, the first item you make on the pottery wheel, maybe it's not the best. You know, maybe you need to work on your technique, work on how you shape things, work on the materials that you utilize. But first and foremost, you need to get to that pottery wheel and have the audacity to say, I am an artist in this moment and I'm going to create. And there's so many of us that are so afraid of that, are so afraid to even create. And those are programs, okay? That doesn't mean that you're not a creator or anything like that, but those are programs to keep you in your limited avatar shell. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is, number one, claim yourself as being an artist, claim yourself as being creative, because you're cutting yourself so far down, or you're undervaluing yourself so much when you say, I'm not the creative type, or I don't have time to be creative. Okay, whose gatekeeper energy are you tapping into, or are you being possessed by to say that about yourself and to say that about your reality? Because, you know, you start getting into this formless clay energy. Once you start navigating the architecture of what's going on in the simulation, what's the plan or what's the blueprint, you can start ascertaining what's truly authentic to you and what's been prescripted. Okay, once you start to like understand the blueprints of the simulation, you can see more of the opportunities for creation. You know, that's one thing that artists have a really, you know, some artists are really great at doing, is finding beauty anywhere, finding opportunity anywhere. And this is the sort of energy that you want to have. And an artistic energy runs the simulation, okay? It's very micromanaged, it's very gate kept, okay? But it's an art. Art runs the simulation, okay? So they would make it seem otherwise, because art's always under attack, art's always undervalued, artists are seen as being loopy and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of power in art. There's a lot of money that goes around with art, like who's allowed to be artistic, whose art gets funded, whose art gets put up. And then if you go and take a really deep dive into secret societies, you'll start seeing that they are also put together and held together up through the arts. Okay, because this is the foundation of reality creation. So with that being said, if art runs the simulation, you are an artist in some way, you're a creator, you might be just creating from a default factory setting. So this is where you get into more of a DIY type of approach, and you start customizing. You customize the heck out of stuff. So another thing you can do, if you want to kind of take this architecture analogy to the next level and apply it to your life, think about like all these cool DIY projects that you see where people are customizing and they're making some really interesting things. Sometimes they do it in their apartments. I know like that's hard because then you lose your security deposit if you make too many customizations. So there is a lot of gatekeeping around these things. But if you start looking at the energy that people are utilizing and tapping into that energetic current of customization, right? Like if this is your life, you should be able to customize it. You should be able to put whatever bells and whistles you want on your life. Okay. And you should also think about, you know, if there's something you feel like you generally can't do, question under whose plan. What is it impossible under the certain blueprint that I'm on right now? Because it could be, you know, like you might be trying to adjust your life under a really not cool blueprint. Like the blueprint is shoddy. It's not going to give you what you want. So you might need to scrap the whole plan, okay? And then create your own plan, okay? And there's a certain artistry and audacity that happens with that. But to get started on that path, start studying actors. Because one thing that you'll notice, like If you're studying your birth chart, a good thing to do is to study the birth charts of actors, because it kind of makes this stuff more real to you. So like if you have a favorite actor, or if there's an actor that you just like, there's like actors and actresses where you just kind of like their face, you like their vibe, or they get attracted or pick or typecast in a very certain role, and people want to like watch that actor. Start looking at their birth chart, because what you'll notice is that there is an archetype that that actor is wearing in the simulation. That's why they get cast in a very particular light. And they just do it so well, because the energies that they're giving off through their birth chart, through their default factory settings, it's just it makes it really easy for them to do that role. Their image, that's how we see them a lot of times. So we want to kind of typecast those actors sometimes as well. But that's how you can kind of start seeing what your avatar is, what your archetype is. I have some resources on my Patreon. Like if you're interested in diving into your archetypes, like there's a meditation you can do, and you'll literally see the archetype that you're wearing in the simulation. It's very enlightening. And you might have a very grand blueprint for yourself, but the archetype that you're wearing, or that you're coded with, will never allow it to be, you know? So you would want to not just look at the words, you know, not just what your archetype is saying, like what words are being shown with your archetype, what are some things that your archetype will say a lot of times, what sort of people will your archetype attract into your life. But then you also want to start asking a deeper question, which we won't get into as much today, but when we talk more about the second house, we'll get into it more, around the materials that are utilized to create your archetype. Like if your archetype was made out of a material, what would it be? So that's just something for you to kind of ponder. Like make it as real as you can. The more tangible you can make this stuff, the more applicable it will be in your life. Okay. So then you want to start having fun. Once you start learning about what your archetype is, most people who are on this sort of quest don't want to be their archetype. They want to create their own thing, you know? Maybe they play the victim archetype time and time again, or the supporting character energy time and time again. Maybe they're ready to not do that anymore. You want to start looking at your archetype not just as something that's been written out for you, or that you can write out for yourself. Like that's one aspect of it, but then there's also a technology that's attached to it. So you want to start thinking about, well, what kind of technology is attached to a certain archetype or avatar that I'm wearing within the simulation? Because like your birth chart is having a conversation about that, you know, and that's why we study the birth chart, not to keep ourselves locked in that shell, but to know the information that we need to know what we're transcending, or when we're going into default factory settings. Okay. So studying actors is a good way to do that. Also playing on different roles. So this is where things get a little dodgy, because then people start acting, you start acting differently to other people. Okay. So, when you're going through an archetype shift or avatar shift, I highly recommend just give yourself as much space as possible, because you're going to look batshit to other people around you. And that's just the way it is. It's designed that way. Okay. So, you know, I work with folks sometimes who have to deal with karmic family, you know, or like the way that the family structure is set up in the simulation. It's really hard to get out of, you know, different family dynamics. But I would highly suggest spending time away as much as you can. Whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you need to stay in the house with them or spend a lot of time because of X, Y, or Z. But just know that, you know, the more you start talking about, if you talk about this to other people, it doesn't sound, it sends alarm bells in the simulation, okay? Because you're not, when you work on an archetype shift, you are so powerful in that regard that you start changing everything around you. Once you stop operating within default factory settings, it changes, it has a domino effect. And for people who only know their factory settings or only know what their role is and have no interest in doing whatever you're doing with changing your archetype and all that sort of stuff, they're going to want to other you as much as possible. And it's just the program, you know? So you want to take as much time to do this independently. That doesn't mean you need to isolate yourself, but you do want to start questioning everything that you've had around you that makes you who you are, you know? So you want to start thinking about, like, okay, what influencers am I watching? What music am I listening to? What movies am I watching? And you want to start asking yourself, like, is this like really what I like, or is this what my archetype likes, you know? And, you know, even watching old stuff that you've watched when you were like younger and that had like a foundational impact on you, like maybe it used to be your favorite movie or your favorite show, try watching it again, you know, but watching it outside of your archetype, you know, and then you can start getting a lot of great information around, okay, well, what programming was this instilling into me? You know, what programs do I still relate with as it relates to this archetype? You know, you can learn a lot that way. But as you are working on dissolving this pre-scripted old identity and treating yourself more like clay, you know, as a work of art that can be molded, that can be customized and personalized and has a lot of heart and soul, right? As you become your greatest artistic piece, just think about, like, when you're working on an art piece, you don't want everybody in your business looking at everything you're doing with this art piece, right? Maybe it's an intimate journey. Maybe it's something that you're still kind of figuring out and you don't want to show your work to everybody, or you don't want to show your creation to everybody. You kind of want to treat your life like that. You know, you want to have that same respect for your life or your narrative, because what you're doing is you're going through a narrative shift. You know, to shift your avatar and to shift your archetype, it's a complete rewrite. And then, you know, then you get into a fun thing of, you know, you might start with going from, let's say you go from victim, let's say you've been a victim for a lot. You would want to try on the role of victimizer. Okay. That doesn't mean that you hurt people. That doesn't mean that you become a victimizer, because, you know, a lot of times that's a very typical trope that happens in the simulation. It's like, oh, I got victimized, so now I'm going to be the victimizer. You know, like, that's an easy polarity based thing that you can get into. But you actually want to clear out the polarity, because you want to also be able to wear the frequency of a victimizer to know what that feels like, to neutralize those experiences coming into your reality. So if this is all written in code, right? And if somewhere in your projection, you're giving off victim, you know, I'm a victim, victimize me, this and that, right? Then you're going to magnetize people who are going to do that to you, right? But if you kind of look at polarity a little different and you work on neutralizing polarity, if you've worn the frequency of victim for so long, you might want to work on wearing the frequency of victimizer, so that it's like when you can be the same as somebody else, they're no longer a threat to you. Okay. I don't know if that's making sense. It's kind of something you just kind of have to move through. But the best way I can describe it is there's actors out there that can play the hero really well, and then they can play the villain really well. Okay. And they are just a little bit more moldable, and they're able to shape their realities and do so in a convincing way a little bit more too. Okay. And when you're able to do that, people who are able to be more multifaceted with their acting roles, they are able to be much better actors, right? So in that way, you could see yourself as like a better player in the simulation. And the idea is, if you're not interested in being a victim or getting taken advantage of by people and all that kind of stuff, then you would want to take out the code of you being a victim. And you would also want to kind of confuse the system and also have the code of victimizer too. So like it nullifies that energy. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the best way I can describe it. And so, but this is what I meant when I said earlier that you need to know who you are, right? Like you are not, you're the architect. You're creating the blueprint. You're not a pawn. So if you've created certain rules or certain aspects to the game, it shouldn't be taboo for you to play those rules. Okay, so you kind of have to not be attached to your avatar or your archetype, because if you're too attached to the role that you've been assigned and you're too invested in that, then that's how you get typecast. All right. And it's very difficult for you to move around. And this goes into also like how you dress and a whole bunch of stuff, you know? So everything has meaning. Every color that you wear has meaning. Like, so start playing around with that. It's the really small things that hold a lot of information. Okay. And so a great way for you to start studying your avatar is study your birth chart, study your natal chart, look at what planets are in your first house. Also your sun, wherever your sun is, that's a very like first house spotlight placement. So that could also share more with you about that as well. And yeah, I am going to look, I know I've been going on, y'all. So I'm going to like look at some comments. Hi, Gorvov. You're welcome. Okay, Willow Princess says, okay, so if y'all have questions, I'm at the point now where I'm gonna like be answering questions. Okay, so just put them in there. Who or what codes us? That's a good question. And one thing that I've learned to not do is to act like I know everything or anything sometimes too. So like, I feel like me even saying, this is what codes us, I feel like that is, like that would diminish my answer, I guess, you know, because there's so much, like I'm learning every single day. But what I will say is there is an intelligence that is organized in a very specific blueprint right now. But if you can get at the core of what that intelligence is, that energy, it's more than a frequency. I'll just call it intelligence. It's like, it's what creates matter. There's an intelligence out there that creates matter, okay? And this intelligence binds us or connects us all together, all right? It keeps us the same, but in the simulation, there's a lot of codes and illusions and projections, which makes things look really different, okay? But if you can get to that source code, then you code you, okay? Like it's something we all have access to, but the way that projections and things are like put at us in the simulation, it looks different than what it is. So it's like a weird house of mirrors. But we can code ourselves, but because if we can tap into that source code, but sometimes there's a remembrance process that needs to occur for that to happen. Oh, thank you, Caravo. Okay, so next question. When destiny swapping, etc. happens, is that a form of others hijacking one's architecture? Okay, thank you. This is such a great question. So I'm learning so much about destiny swapping. By the way, just dropped an album called Destiny Designer, which kind of goes through it's a subliminal, but it's also like a dance album, and it goes through the experience, this whole kind of destiny swap experience, retrieving your source code, all that sort of stuff. And then I also have my Destiny Swap Reversal Toolkit for folks who are really looking for tangible tools to make sure that they keep their dreams in alignment with what their desires are in the simulation. So I just wanted to plug those things. But that being said, I'm learning something new about this whole destiny swapping thing, or I'm getting a different perspective on it all the time. You know, this stuff goes really deep. It's not just as simple as like somebody being jealous of you and wanting to like take your life, and then they do a ritual and then they destiny swap you. Like, I guess that can happen too. But sometimes, and this goes into our avatar and our archetypes that we're coded with. Let's say that you have more of an avatar or an archetype of being like a being somebody who gives to others, who's an overgiver. You know, how would that play out in the simulation? You know, you might have relationships where it seems like you're depleting yourself. You might have, you know, issues with family where it feels like you're depleting yourself, issues at work where it feels like you're depleting yourself because you have a very particular archetype or avatar. That's one aspect to it. But then there's also instruction sets happening in your blood and in your cells and in your DNA, which is also telling you to overgive, right? Because that's a code that's running. So this sometimes the instruction, this is why I'm getting into this whole concept of blueprints and architecture so much, okay? Because this is kind of, I've been challenged to think more in this way. It's been really fun and interesting, but it's been a challenge for me too. Like, instead of trying to, you know, let's say a game is rigged, right? You know how y'all, like, you go to like the arcades and then there's those like claw little things where it's like you're supposed to be able to pick up a stuffed animal and, you know, easily do it, right? If you could just play it right. So it's like, are you going to be that person who learns that stuffed animal game really well and you get out the stuffed animal? That's one way to do it. Some people can master those games, but it takes a long time, right, to get that out. Or are you going to find another way to get the stuffed animal? Maybe you decide that you're going to make it. Maybe you decide you're going to go out and buy it with your money. Like, there are other ways to get that stuffed animal. And some people might work really hard to navigate or turn the gears just right so they can get the stuffed animal out of that machine. Other people might be like, you know what, this game is kind of rigged. I do want that stuffed animal, but I'm going to go about getting it another way. Okay. That's kind of the architecture of things. So you might be on a blueprint. For the person who asked about destiny swapping, you might be on a blueprint to always be destiny swapped. That's the architectural plan and layout. Now, there's ways to navigate that, you know, there's ways to navigate that being in that particular framework. It's a lot of work. I mean, it can happen. There are ways to do it, but then you get to a certain point where it's like, I don't want to have to deal with this every time I, you know, engage in a work opportunity or a relationship, or, you know, because that's the whole thing with destiny swapping too, is it happens with like people you're really close with and stuff like that. You would want to get to a point of like, where did I consent to that blueprint of being taken from, or that my energy is somehow less, I need to overgive, I somehow am programmed to think I'm less than. That's the architecture of the avatar that you're working with. So that's why you would want to look, if destiny swapping's coming up, you might be wearing a role in the simulation of things get taken from me all the time and life isn't fair. So you would want to work on that before you at some point you would want to work on the role that you were given, the life isn't fair, that everything gets taken from me. You would want to work on that architecture so that the instruction sets, so that that's not actually showing up in your reality. But it's very biological. It's very cellular. That's what I'm learning about this whole destiny swap thing. We got to get at more of the foundations of why things are occurring the way that they are. And there's a lot of information in our mitochondrial DNA actually, related to that, which I might get into later on. Okay. And what gives or permits for that hijacking to take place? So it's all consent, you know. The secret is that we all can create our reality. That's a lot though to handle. Like, I create my reality. Like that's a lot of information, and that's been messed with the whole law of attraction thing. Because when I say you create your reality, I'm not like, even that has been hijacked, because it's like, when law of attraction people say you create your reality, they're kind of like, it's this whole thing of like, so it's your fault if you don't have what you need. So it's like, yeah, we create our reality, but we also create our reality through consenting to certain things or not consenting to certain things, and this is why groupthink is so powerful and all that sort of stuff. So we give permission for this to occur, but we aren't fully conscious of everything that's occurring, or what's on this particular game board, or what we're navigating. And so we've just kind of assumed that this is just the way things are. These are natural universal laws. And so that's us consenting to it, because we're saying this is the way things are, and what we affirm is. So it's kind of a big joke in a weird way. That's why we don't want to take things too seriously. If you start taking things too seriously, then you've given a lot of your power away to the simulation. Okay, can we hold on loops from past lifetimes? Okay, so this is another thing. I don't know about past lives, because I am okay. Past lives, if I believe in past lives, then I'm giving a lot of energy into linear time. One thing I've been deconstructing is my investment with the future. Even last year, I was putting out a lot of content, which actually helped. It was helpful. But, I got to a certain point where it wasn't working for me anymore. I was doing a lot of future mapping, connecting with my future self, all that kind of stuff. Also did a lot of like past life regressions and all that sort of stuff. But you consent to linear time. You consent to the laws of linear time when you do that, and then you work within the confines of linear time. So if you're always focused on this future version of yourself, there's a part of you splintered that's not here in the now moment. Same thing, if you're always like working on healing the past, there's a part of you that's splintered into a past reality that's not in this now moment. And it makes a lot more sense to be able to call in the reality that you want to see if it's all happening now, if it's all now, So that's something you want to look a little bit more into as well. Is the past, like, is you dwelling on a past life, is that a program? Like, is it helpful? Because there are these like weird programs, same thing with the inner child and all that sort of stuff. You can loop on those things, and it can be a part of your factory settings of, I'm this way in relationships because this happened to me in a past life, and then this happened to me when I was a child, and all that kind of stuff. Like, you get too caught up in your story, the story that you were assigned, when that's only a small aspect of what you are. And when we put a lot of energy into our past selves or our future selves, then sometimes we can also subscribe to that. I started noticing when I dropped future planning and I dropped notions about the future, things that I had on my vision board to accomplish in the future, and I let that go, I was actually able to call it in. Like, once I folded up that concept of linear time, I was able to actually complete those things that I had been keeping on my vision board for years. And it was because I collapsed I collapsed like this idea of me being a future version of myself, or because the future keeps things ahead of you, right? It's a form of hierarchy. You have to earn it in a certain way. You have to fight for it. So yeah, I think I don't give too much energy now to time-based things, linear time-based things, because I'm starting to understand more and more that a lot of the assumptions of linear time keeps me limited about how time can work for me. So I had to let go of the past and the future, which, as somebody who has historically loved to plan, that was really hard for me to do. But it's very effective. Can we hold on loops? Oh, no, I answered that one. Okay. My first house is Pisces, Neptune, Midwest Jamaican. Okay, you probably, I don't know if you've ever acted before, but you can probably, I think, acting is it's a very spiritual thing. You can tap into the energy of different things, really. Like, that's a pretty big gift, I think, of somebody with like a Neptune in the first house. It doesn't have to be literal acting, but you could probably wear somebody's shoes, and that's really powerful. Like, if you can understand why somebody's motivations are the way they are by connecting with their energy in such a way, like, that's a superpower. And that's something that unlocks as you start transcending your specific avatar. You get into that Neptune in the first house type of energy, and you're able to start sculpting like your life like water. Your life has that amount of flow, and you're able to, with the power of your hands or your intentions or your thoughts or however you do things, you're able to sculpt your life. And it's not just like a big old block of mass. It's something that you're able to have fun with shaping. That's how I see Neptune in the first house. Who put these codes in us? Who? I'm still getting at that. I think, oh, I don't know it all yet, but I have a feeling it's a joke. I have a feeling that, the more you get to humor, the more you get into the how the simulation operates. It's something funny. I don't know what it is, but I have a feeling it's not nearly as serious as we're led to believe. I think that more truth is found in humor than in things being really rigid and serious. So I'm not sure who put the codes in us, Okay, the ownership is crucial. Yeah, and then also ownership. That in itself is a projection. Ownership, we want to take ownership over our thoughts or ownership over our bodies, but what does it mean to be owned? Is that something we want to actually hold on to? Or are we just operating within an old blueprint, and we need to update our blueprint, like they told us in this towards a new architecture? Maybe the plan needs to shift. Okay. But in order for us to shift the plan, we kind of need to know what's going on, and then having the audacity to get your hands dirty, to do things differently, to have people look at you weird. You're going to start acting differently, and you want to give yourself the space for the artwork of yourself to unfold, for you to be in that main character energy. Taking dominance over your first house is not just main character energy, but it's also like, I'm also writing and directing this too. Like, I'm acting, like, you're super control. It's kind of like you have to be kind of a weird control freak, where it's like, all right, I'm acting, I'm writing, I'm directing, like I'm all hands on deck here, and I might be the villain for a moment. I might try to be the superhero the next. And some people might ask, well, how do you do this and just like live your regular life? That's why I like sound attunements and stuff. I find a lot of value in them. So if you're interested in like working through different archetypes, I have a lot of them on my Bandcamp. So if you're looking to get into a certain frequency that feels off for you, that's helpful as well. You know, being able to wear that frequency through sound, through subliminal messaging has been really powerful. Quantum hypnosis helps too with that. But yeah, your imagination, stretching your imagination, being able to visualize, being able to see, being able to construct. These are the building blocks. And this is what helps you to get into not just having a new avatar, but creating your own, right? You need writing and directing privileges for that, you know. So you want to take over the set, you know, like if you can just imagine how it would be if you've been being treated like an extra, right, in your life, and just think about the backlash an extra would get, right, if they decided to rewrite the movie that they were in. You know, people would kick them off set and be like, and don't come back. But that same extra could self-start and fund their own documentary or independent film, right? And it might not have all the bells and whistles. They might need to learn more, but they could get that out and they could create their own narrative, you know. So that's kind of the energy that we're in. We're in this like interesting guerrilla energy of like, maybe the rules that we thought were final, maybe they're not. Maybe we have more creative power than we thought we did. So yeah, that's where I'm gonna stop for the first house. If you're interested in diving deeper, you can get a Beyond the Birth Chart reading. Also, I want to plug my Spiral Sound Lab, which starts August 18th. This is where I'm doing a 4-month group journey with folks on the Patreon, the Black Diamond Patreon, for folks who want to create their reality through sound, through music, create your own soundtrack of your life, what that looks like, everything from like different ways to write out subliminals, command codes, orchestrate sound, engineer sound. Yeah, so I'm really excited for that. So if that's something that you're interested in, then check out the information below. And if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, you can inquire about my uncoached offering and learn more about that through emailing me. Sending y'all lots of love and joy until we meet again. Bye.